Aloha, beautiful beings, and welcome to another episode of the Yoni Havana podcast, where we explore consciousness, looking into how things work in the universe so we can enjoy life more and become more whole. My guest today is a multidisciplinary teacher and creator, Seth Bailin. In this episode, Seth shares his journey into a fruit-based diet, how he resolved his asthma after many years, his views on our relationship with the divine, how he realized everything is connected in the universe, and much more. If you find value in this conversation, please share it with someone you love. So enjoy this lighthearted and educational conversation with Seth Bailin. Aho. Seth, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here and meeting you for the first time on the mic.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, I have not heard of the podcast stream that you were on a couple of days ago. It's June 23 when we're recording, and you were on this stream. I got into it by chance from another group that I'm in, and I watched it like at 5 a.m. I just put it on when I was doing my morning movement. And there were a few things that you were talking about that really piqued my interest. And I was interested about your journey and everything. So anyways, I reached out to you on Instagram, which I don't even hang out on Instagram much. And here we go, like a couple of days after we're here live on the mic. So it's pretty cool. And thank you for taking on the opportunity.
Oh, yeah. And shout out Dr. Longo from Old World, Florida for having me on. I think that just connected a lot of people and a lot of ideas. And shout out Old World, Florida.
So question for you. So are you living on a farm right now? What's
Yes,
your life
indeed.
like these days?
Yes, I just moved to a farm in, in southern Miami in June. So it's the end of June now. So I've been here a month. I did spend a month here this winter, and I liked it so much that I decided to move all my things here and stay here indefinitely. So we're a fairly new 7-acre permaculture farm. We grow a lot of mangoes. We have hundreds of mango trees, and we're planting hundreds of other tropical fruits, both rare and common. We have avocados, coconuts, bananas, ananas. The owner of the farm really likes the anana family, which is soursop, atamoya, sugar apple, things like that. So we do grow a lot of those. And we have vegetables as well. And we'll be expanding slowly since it's a fairly new farm. But yep, this is where I'm staying now and doing a work trade situation.
It's awesome. My in-laws live in South Miami, and one of the things that you were talking about is sapodilla. So sapodilla, they have a sapodilla tree. I tried it for the first time shortly after I met my wife, which is about 10 years ago. It's one of my favorite fruits. It's just the flavor and the juiciness of that fruit. And I mean, they have all kinds of trees there and exotic fruits. And I'm from Israel, so I lived in pretty warm places close to the equator. I really enjoy fruit. I was just in Israel a couple of weeks ago. Just a ton of juices, fruits. And when I'm on the beach, when I'm hot, that's when I really crave those foods. It's very hydrating and high vibration foods. I'm not plant-based, I eat meat. Over time, as I've been going on my journey, I feel like I'm eating more and more raw food. It's not that I'm completely letting go. I feel like I get some benefits from eating meat, but there's definitely some of the things you talked about with Dr. Longo is like the lust that I have after fruits versus the meat. I mean, there's nothing to compare. So I definitely found it very interesting. And the charts that you shared on like the Frugivore and the mouth and the teeth, and I mean, I was like, wow, I've never seen this information before, and it really piqued my interest. And the more and more that I get into fruits, and I eat dairy as well. I have all kinds of questions for you, but the first one will be how did you get into? Tell me if you're a complete vegan or frugivore. Like, I'd love to hear about that, and how'd you arrive at this lifestyle?
Yeah, so labels can be tricky because people might have different definitions of these labels, but I am definitely 100% vegan. I do not consume animal products, flesh secretions, and that is since 2 years ago. So fairly new in my life, and I'm 36. but I have been slowly moving toward that for my whole life. I think I've always loved fruits and vegetables. And in my 20s, I started dating a farmer, and she was vegetarian. And she was really influential in shaping my understanding of what we eat, because she was growing it and preparing it, and had seemed very close to the cycle of these plant-based foods. And so I did go vegetarian in my late 20s, and then I kind of went back, and then I was pescatarian, and I kind of slowly started cutting out animal products for maybe 10 or 15 years before I was fully vegan. So that's where I'm at now. I'm extremely happy with where I am. I don't crave animal foods. I do not feel the need for them. And as far as being frugivore, fruitarian, let's pick apart those labels for a sec too. Frugivore means one who is physiologically adapted to eating a diet of primarily fruit. So I would say that all human beings are inherently frugivores, no matter what your eating habits are. That we're all endowed with the teeth, the intestinal tract, the senses, everything to make us attracted to raw fruits in their ripe, fresh state, and not attracted to sinking our teeth into furry or feathered animals with bones and blood and things like that. It seems like humans are only attracted to the meat after it's been after the animal's been killed and butchered and seasoned and cooked and prepared and paired with vegetables and paired with other foods. So anyways, frugivore, I believe everyone, if you're a human, is a frugivore based on our natural endowment. And fruitarian means one who eats primarily fruit. So since my diet is about 80-90% fruit, I consider myself a fruitarian. If you ask other people, they might say that fruitarian means you only eat fruit and nothing else. So if you eat one leaf of lettuce, you're no longer fruitarian. Again, these labels can get tricky and kind of subjective at some point, but I do consider myself vegan. I consider myself fruitarian, but I also eat whatever I want. I don't really have limitations. If I want to eat fried rice or something that's cooked with salt and oil and some complex foods, or like even like a dessert that may not be quote unquote the ideal healthiest food, I will allow myself to have that, but I'll just be ready for any consequences that come because of that. So my philosophy is based in taking full responsibility for what I put in my mouth, and also just allowing myself to eat whatever I want, but being aware, why do I want and crave these foods? What is this food going to give me? I think the mindfulness is really important when approaching your dietary choices. So let me answer the last part of the question, which is how did I get here? And that was, well, I've always kind of been a sick kid. I had asthma and allergies growing up. I still am allergic to nuts and cats, and nuts are in a lot of things, peanuts and all tree nuts. So I was reading the ingredient labels on every piece of food that I ate since I learned how to read. And I think that set me up to be very aware of what I put in my body, very aware of what they put in food, because I'm asking myself, what is high fructose corn syrup? What's titanium dioxide? What's polysorbate 80? And I would actually go and look these things up. So I was just very aware from a young age about what was in my food. And I would look for the things with the shortest ingredient lists, because that's simple to me. I didn't want preservatives at some point. I didn't want all this added colors and sugars and stabilizers and things like that. So here we are today, where my breakfast is always one ingredient. It's just mangoes or it's watermelon. If I have a nice watermelon, I don't combine them with anything. Sometimes I might cut up mango and put some passion fruit on it. That's amazing, but that's 2 ingredients. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just been a lifelong journey for me, being aware of what I'm eating and being always attracted to plant foods, and then learning about, I don't really know how to put this, I guess the horrors and the dangers of animal-based foods. I watched the film Earthlings, which you can view for free on nationearth.com. It's narrated by Joaquin Phoenix. It's a really well done film showing us behind the scenes what it takes to get our food, and also how humans just exploit animals in so many different ways, from the pet industry to the fishing, the land animal farming, et cetera, et cetera. So that was one thing that helped me open my eyes and my heart to the ethics of what we eat. But when it comes down to the science and the physical and chemical aspect of what we eat, it was a few books that really put me on this path. One is the 80-10-10 diet by Douglas Graham. I think it's right here, actually. This book is pretty amazing. It may be misleading because it has the word diet in the title. And I don't like the word diet because diet has the word die in it. And I think we should use other terms to sort of describe what we eat that don't have the word die in it, that might be more inherently healthy living. This book is so great because it breaks down the difference between frugivores, carnivores, grain eaters, things like that, and really highlights our physiology as frugivores. It also is just very well researched in the science behind digestion and glycemic index, glycemic load, all the questions that we have. Well, isn't fruit too much sugar? Don't I need protein? All this stuff. He really goes deep. Here's a section I just flipped open to randomly. Protein deficiency does not exist. So I think a lot of people are afraid to jump into this plant-based diet because I need the protein. I want to be strong. I want to go to the gym. I want to have muscle. But unfortunately, the protein deception has been bestowed upon our entire society by industry, by corporate interests. We really don't need as much protein as they tell us. And in fact, most people are not protein deficient. We're protein poisoned. We have excess protein in our body, and that causes kidney issues. That causes just a highly acidic environment in our system. And so after learning about the science of what we eat from the 80-10-10 diet and a couple other books, the China study really illustrates, through the largest study of nutrition ever done, the correlation between protein consumption and cancer, early death, diabetes, heart disease. So those things are highly, highly correlated. I'm not going to say that one causes the other because we know that correlation does not equal causation, but they're highly correlated. And if you'd like to reduce your risk of those aforementioned diseases, it might behoove one to start cutting back on the overt proteins, which is animal products, and even things like nuts and seeds and soy. There's plant-based proteins that cause protein excess, that cause proteinosis, that cause acidosis, high levels of uric acid, sulfuric acid, things like that in the body. So it was opening my eyes to the ethics and the science of what we eat that really just made me go 2 years ago, ooh, I think I need to jump in head first and just live this lifestyle and see how I feel. Turns out when I cut out eggs and cheese for breakfast and I started eating apples, oranges, and watermelon instead, my asthma completely disappeared. And I had been suffering from asthma for my whole life. I used my inhaler pretty much every day, like a rescue inhaler. And I also had other inhalers, like steroid-based ones, that they never really seemed to help. They kind of quickly alleviated symptoms, but they never helped long-term. The changes in my food intake is really what has benefited my asthma long-term. When I say that, I mean reversed it. I mean, I don't experience it anymore unless I'm stuck in a house with cats, or if I overeat cooked heavy foods, some asthma symptoms will come back. But as long as I keep that in check and I'm in nature a lot and I get my sleep and I just continue eating fruits when I'm hungry, then I do not experience asthma whatsoever.
Very interesting. We have some commonalities in our path. First of all, I'm 36, so we're the same age. And I experienced asthma at a very young age. So I was on the inhalers. I can't remember, like I was like 7, 8 or whatnot. But what resolved my asthma was actually not food, it was swimming. So within 2 months of swimming at age 9, my lungs expanded. And from that on, I did not have any asthma. That's also why I'm in the path that I'm at as a holistic lifestyle guide. And I mean, then I expanded to awakening guide as I got deeper into my spiritual path. But it's interesting, different approaches there to resolve health issues.
Hmm.
My perspective, and it's, I haven't dove that deep into nutrition. The meat that I do eat comes from regenerative farms. Actually have a direct relationship with my farmer. His wife came and dropped off the beef that I eat. I don't eat it in excess. If I eat it in excess, sometimes I do feel, let's say, if I gorge, doing it consciously and eat, let's say, even big bites, which I don't do recently, I would feel constrictions in breathing. One more thing that I've recently been exposed to in terms of asthma is that people with asthma, something that's like 50 times more likely to come from trauma. I think my trauma, based on the work that I've been doing, comes from ancestral trauma. I've been working through ancestral trauma that seems to be in my DNA from a lot of it. The visions that I've had are Holocaust visions. I mean, just all kinds of craziness. This podcast really is about
Wow.
understanding what is this experience, how do things work. And in terms of my diet, for example, something I've been led to by yogis and also Sadhguru is that I eat from the most raw, juiciest food. So I drink before I eat. I finish drinking about 15 to 20 minutes. I'll eat some fruit, very juicy, kind of one at a time. I don't need too many ingredients. And then I will eat perhaps a little bit of a veggie. So, like a typical dinner, let's say, would be like I eat some, we're going to call it watermelon here in the summer, then a couple bites of asparagus, and then I eat some meat, and that's pretty much it. I think the simplicity for the body in terms of not having too many ingredients to process, it's just like too many inputs, definitely make it harder for the body to process and digest. I think the size of the bites, chewing, touching the food, I eat with my hands. Not the most polite, perhaps, but I have a connection with the food. And interestingly enough, I hired a permaculture company to do a design in my property. I live on a bigger property, and to grow a bunch of the food. So I have a straight connection. I'm standing there, with my feet on the ground, and I have a connection. I think a lot of it is the love that is being put into the food. With the research on meats, and still to be determined what would happen once we have, let's say, a lot more of the regenerative smaller farms and people connect locally with their farmer and they treat animals differently. I think those rates in diseases will definitely be lower. Will there be inflammation? Will people still take big bites of steak? I was just in Israel. My sister is 40 years old, and then she's way smaller than me. And I still just like, oh, she's like, what's the big deal? And she's like taking a giant bite of steak, just unconscious. What do we call it? Eating. And just the education we've had. There were more things that I saw that you're into, and just kind of heard of the cuff that you were saying with Dr. Longo. Is it seems like you've done a bunch of awakening and learning. It seems like you're really good at learning. You get into something perhaps out of necessity in the beginning, and then you learn it yourself, which is, I think, how you've been arriving at this path. I think a lot of times people that go and study nutrition and just get the information from somebody else, and get the title, and like, no, I'm a nutritionist. You've been learning from experience and doing your own research. That's why I was gravitated towards getting you on the show and getting to know you, because it's interesting to me. And I went vegetarian for a month. I did keto for a month. I did all kinds of different diets. I've done diets for, let's say, lifestyle nutrition. I've done dietas for ayahuasca. I've done all kinds of different things, and notice how I felt. I've been into different movement practices, whether it's CrossFit or something called movement practice. People that kind of dedicate their lives into movement. What's interesting with them is a bunch of them have been vegans, been yogis and vegan, and 100% of them, though, started eating meat. They focus on performance in terms of their life. I don't think they're distance runners. Perhaps they may not be the healthiest long term, but they do enjoy the performance of their bodies and doing handstands and all kinds of different tricks. So it's just fascinating to me how people make their choices. I think, and this is why I keep wanting to learn when I've seen the Frugivore. Like, what are we actually built to do? What would be the best for us long term? Do I necessarily want to live in a body till I'm 150? Not necessarily. I feel like I'm coming back anyways. So I think for everybody's, and there's the camps. I'm all carnivore. I'm all vegan. I mean, and as you're saying, the labels is what really separates people. And I love that you said,
Yeah.
if I feel like eating something, I'm gonna have to deal with the consequences. It's all about having the connection to the body and the understanding that, or understanding that everything is an effect. So it's a cause and effect. So I really salute you for that. It's interesting. It's just, to me, it's very interesting. I'm gravitated to eat more and more fruit, and I do eat dairy. The dairy that I eat is raw dairy, and not in excess. I seem to be handling it very well. My wife, on the other hand, not at all.
Yeah. No, I like what you said about just having a connection to your food is so important. It's so important to know where your food comes from. You know, if there's less ideal foods, if they come from a superior quality, it's going to be a better food than the cheapest version there is, especially animal products, because you're talking about factory farming laden with antibiotics, you know, the V word, I don't know if I can say that, for the cows. You know, the animal pharmaceutical industry is almost like $1 trillion a year industry. I mean, it's there's so much money put into just feeding livestock drugs. And so when you eat factory farmed animal products, you're eating those drugs at the same time. So
Growth hormones,
growth
yeah.
hormones, just you name it, it's just super nasty. So any type of food, there's a spectrum of
Mhm.
quality, and you always want to be on the, you know, the most transparent side of that spectrum and the highest quality, regenerative, whatever that means, sustainable. It's also interesting too what you said about asthma and about swimming, because breathing is a huge thing that can unlock and optimize our health. And swimming teaches you that, but it's also aerobic. So, you know, exercise, activity, breathing, awareness, these are all so important to health. It's not just what we put in our mouths.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as for breathing, actually, I got into more and more breath work. I mean, the breath itself, which is, I feel like it's the spirit breathing into our bodies, kind of the loner for the life. Is It's been very interesting how much we can access just by the power of the breath. So that's been
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. I will say too that I'm I'm not even inclined to go eat out, even if there's, let's say, like an all organic menu. Because at the end of the day, if somebody's preparing my food and they're having a bad day, there's got to be perhaps some bad juju with the food. Not treating food with love, and somebody having, they don't even know who's the customer, but they're having a bad day, kind of, their boss, whatever, has been bothering them. And so there's a bunch of negative energy going into the food, and I'm consuming it. What I have been saying, and part of the things that I show with, they say, factory farming and men's retreats that I lead and I talk about eating, is like, if you're going to be eating, and those include plant medicine. So I'm like, if you're going to be eating some factory farming meat, imagine they already have trauma. So now you are what you eat. You're about to ingest the trauma, and then you're going to come back here next year and do another plant medicine ceremony. And now you're just trying to undo the cow's trauma. And so it's been interesting, just like as you're saying, like the connection and the culprits perhaps of letting somebody else handle the food. A lot of times also outsourcing it to somebody who's been giving a ton of love and nurturing and know what they're doing is going to benefit one if they themselves don't have the capacity to give a lot of love to their food. Perhaps they're in a more contracted state. So it goes both ways.
For sure. And I think it's also important to bless your food before you eat it, because you're talking about the energetic imprint on these foods based on who prepares it, how it's raised, how it's processed. The last step is how you energetically imprint the food before you eat it. So I think that's why saying grace is really nice. I was always turned off by it as a kid because I was just kind of anti religious and I didn't like what the Catholic Church was doing and all this stuff in the name of God. And so I was always kind of an atheist as a kid, and I wasn't into things like saying grace. But now I see the value of it. I see the value of expressing gratitude before you eat, expressing gratitude to the farmers, to the food itself, to the Most High. And if you energetically imprint that food with those gracious thoughts, it's going to increase the vibration of that food, metaphysically speaking.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's actually scientifically speaking. So there's a
Mm,
company called Lila Quantum, and they have pretty much these devices called quantum blocks, and they have concentrated quantum energy in them. And they've shown that, I mean, this is pretty much like a high level blessing between two plates of metal. You put the food in there, and they measure before the harmony and the crystals when you freeze the water or the food, and all that. So you can see the harmony of the food. They can see that it's undoing glyphosate. They can see that it's undoing a bunch of things. At the same time, when they measured water with Dr. Masuro Emoto, I forget his name, in Japan, they've shown like people just holding hands, sending gratitude to water. Within minutes, the crystals when they froze them look in much more harmony. So it works. It's beyond Now it's beyond the woo, it's beyond the we think it's going to work. It works. It's just we have the science now. Usually the science needs to catch up to what we feel and already experience.
Wait,
And what's
I want to interject one thing.
yes, please.
Isn't it strange that Masaru Emoto's name is Emoto, and he's studying emotions and their imprint on molecular structures of things? Like, I almost thought when I realized that he might be fake, because I haven't actually read his papers or I haven't looked too deeply into him. But I'm like, Emoto is a very particular and peculiar name for someone who's studying the science of emotions and emoting. Have you ever thought about that?
So, well, by now, and I will say like our paths are so similar because I was an atheist at a young age, living in Israel and seeing a bunch of the Orthodox community, which I think a lot of it is kind of in vain and their I think that the light part in one and how they pray and how they say grace and all that, just kind of like, oh, this is what we do, rather than having the connection and faith. So this is why I was turned off by that. And by now I'm like, there's no coincidence in there. A person actually, I think, gets a name for what they have the mission to do in this life. I think there's a lot of meaning. My name, which Yoni is a pretty common name in Israel. It's the Johnny of Israel. My name is Jonathan. He's Jonathan. Yoni is just another Johnny there. In what I learned from Sanskrit and such, Yoni, and there's a Yoni egg, the listeners can look it up, but it's kind of the gateway to the universe. It's the female reproductive organ. And my last name, which it might perhaps to people in Florida or the world, they see Havana, they think about Cuba, but Havana in Hebrew means understanding. And my mission really is to come and understand the universe. So it's just like it's imprinted in my name. I think there are no coincidences there with the motto, with everybody's names. There's just complete meaning. It's all divine in that way.
It's serendipitous. I agree, because my name is Seth and I was born a Scorpio, which is representative of the dark part of the year. Scorpio is the middle month of the fall season, and Seth comes from Set, the sun's set. Mm-hmm. And so Scorpio is the sun setting on the year, cosmically speaking. So, and I've always been kind of attracted to the darker areas of life, not to worship them in any satanic type of way, but just to learn about them, to shine light on them, and to understand them. So, I guess you're right. Maybe we're just given names that we end up fulfilling at some point in our lives.
Absolutely. It's interesting what you're saying about the darkness and light. So I actually had the CEO of this company called Lila Quantum just recently on the show. So whoever's listening to this, it's probably 2 episodes before. And he said darkness, and it's interesting, especially these times as we're awakening and kind of there's more light coming into the earth and into the individuals, and light being shed on things that have been going on for a long time. But he said darkness cannot fight light. And the way that he said it, he said, so you have a dark room and you light a candle, like there's nothing that can be happening. Like it may not like illuminate the whole room, but like it's going to illuminate. The darkness cannot do anything about it, which is it really, pun intended, it lit a light bulb in my head. I'm like, wow, so this is the power of light. It's stronger. And think about consciousness levels. If you're familiar with David Hawkins' work, Map of Consciousness, the levels of consciousness, the higher they go, they're more powerful. So love is way more powerful than fear. It's just the way it is. It's way more powerful. So the more, let's say, perhaps there's a lot of fear in the world a couple of years ago, 2020, 2021 and whatnot, and the more light we bring and shine on that, it's just kind of dissipates the fear. It just overtakes it. It transmutes it. It transmutes darkness into light. We don't really transmute light into darkness. People may bring darkness, may try to disconnect in some ways divine beings from source, but it can't really be done. Everything is source. Everything is divine in that way. On that end, as you touched on atheism, I'd love to hear what's your spiritual path has been evolving.
Sure. So my father was raised Jewish. My mother was raised Catholic. So they raised us, me and my brothers, without either of them. We kind of did both. We kind of dabbled in each major holiday of each religion. But I was never baptized. I was never bar mitzvahed, so we were raised pretty agnostic, you might say. And I wasn't convinced of either, religion, of either path towards spirituality. So I was a self-proclaimed atheist for a long time. And my reasoning was kind of, why would God allow such horrors in the world to happen? Because I would see things like war and famine and just the most dark and, suffering on the planet. So, and I would say, why would God allow that to happen? So that was my kind of reasoning into atheism. Then the more
Uh,
I read,
I
actually, it
just
was
want to
Rudolph's.
I
Mhm.
want to interject there, which I had the same exact reasoning. Like if that's what happened, like, and I'm thinking about my family in the Holocaust, how could there be a God? Well, why would there be part of experience? So yes, sorry, please go on. Just the similarities in
Right,
our path,
right.
in our timelines are just fascinating.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. So let's see, where was I? I started
Rudolf
reading a
Steiner.
lot of, Rudolf Steiner, and because the woman I was dating at the time, who also was the vegetarian I mentioned earlier, she was studying him, I think, because of his work in biodynamic farming. He introduced biodynamic farming to the world. A lot of winemakers still use it to this day. And so I became interested in Steiner. I started reading a lot of his works, and he's really into reincarnation and the spiritual aspect of life. And, when you're born, your soul descends from these outer spheres into a body at the first breath. And then when you die, your soul expands back out. And it really, really opened my mind to the possibilities of these things being real. I didn't jump in and believe it all at once, but I really started to consider it. And then the more I read everything, I just read a lot. After high school, I fell in love with reading again, because they force you to read. They don't force you, they assign books in school, and you kind of have to read them, and I never liked that. But as soon as I graduated, I was able to read what I was interested in, and it turns out I love reading, and I love learning, and I love exploring what people have to share. So I read a lot of this other writer, Hazrat Inayat Khan. He's an Indian Sufi mystic who, his whole musical philosophy is based in God and service of God and the goodness of it all and the beauty of it all. And I'm a musician. I grew up playing music, and I studied music in college, and I have a graduate degree in music, and always been a musician. So experiencing what someone has to say about God and spirituality through an avenue of music, I think actually helped me understand, oh, there is a bigger picture going on. There is this energy, this consciousness, and that's the other thing I was learning about consciousness and the mind, and how maybe we're not just particles randomly smashing into each other. Maybe there is some sort of divine work, some divine energy that we are expressing. So I don't know if it was one thing, but it was definitely one thing that led to another, to another, to another. Here we are today. And oh, I'll give one more shout out to Mark Passio. His podcast, What on Earth is Happening, really helped me sort of open my eyes to, well, he studies the mystery traditions, he studies consciousness, spirituality, different secret societies, even as far as how their approach to the mysteries goes. So, and he talks about worldview, randomness versus determinism. He talks about the extremes of these worldviews, where the fundamental religious people might be on the extreme of determinism. Everything's determined, everything's pre-scripted, fate is real. You really have no choices in the world, and you just have to kind of let God do his work. That's one extreme. The other extreme is randomness, which I think the materialist atheists subscribe to, where, oh, you have free will of everything, there's nothing pre-scripted, everything's just a random game, and you get to go on through life making choices, and there's no objectivity, really. It's all subjective, and everything's random and a choice in the moment. And Mark Passio helped me realize it's sort of a blending of the two. You actually have both. You have this determinist aspect of natural law, which is, now I understand it as God's law, karma, right? Even physical laws, like the way things fall down, or thermodynamics, just different physical laws, spiritual laws. Those are the determinist aspect of life that do not change no matter what you try to do. On the other side of the spectrum is the randomness aspect of free will, that we have the choice to say yes, say no, go left, go right, do this, do that. But it's always going to be within the bounds of natural law. So I really like that. And after I heard that, it kind of helped me really understand where I am, where we are, and kind of how the world works a little bit. And it does work with the spiritual aspect, because natural law is God's law. And now this gets to the point of, if there's so much suffering in the world, how would God allow that? Well, it's because we have free will and people make choices that hurt other people. So, but the natural law says there's karma. So if you knowingly hurt another, those consequences will come back to you on a spiritual level, and maybe even a physical, direct way. I don't know exactly how karma works, but I do believe it exists, and the more bad we do in the world, the more bad is going to come back at us. The more good we put into the world, the more good that's going to come back at us. So I think there's so much suffering in the world, and God allows it because people just make these really terrible, harmful choices. And the more that keeps happening, the more the world as a whole is going to suffer. So the more we make good choices, serve goodness, serve God, whatever that is to the individual, I think the less suffering we're going to see. I think things like holocausts and slavery and exploitation will literally disappear if we all start to make better choices. And maybe that's what the golden age is. Maybe we are in some sort of dark age, Kali Yuga. I don't exactly know. But, maybe we're in this age spiritually along this cosmic cycle where people are just making these choices based in selfish ego, physical pleasure, darkness, and it's affecting the whole world. And I do believe that maybe we're going to ascend into a golden age. It's the age of Aquarius, whatever that means. I don't claim to really know, but I do know that our choices affect everything around us, that we are co-creators of the universe. So I guess that's my spiritual path. I have no title for it. I do believe in a creator. I don't see how this could have possibly assembled itself randomly. It doesn't make any sense. So I guess that's where I'm at. It was a little scattered, but does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And I love what you said in the end, because that's how I see it. It's co-creating. So we're a part. The way I see it is that we are part of God. There's some universal laws. You call them natural law, or however that is. These are just the constructs of creation. I think creation really started. My most recent understanding, or say understanding, it's really hard to decipher here, but I'm not going to get into the words right now. So from origin, kind of from nothing into something, and as this something keeps going and going, we're derivatives of that source. And the derivatives can have obviously thicker layers of separation from source, and it has to do also with the dimensions. So first, second, third, etc. The lighter we are, I think, the less the ego and these other creations and identities that we've created are called to have these experiences. I think, though, the creator wanted and wants to experience sometimes abuse. He wants to be an abuser. That's how I see Holocaust. That's how I at least have this reasoning now for why was there a Holocaust? Why is there pain? Why is there suffering? A lot of it is for the sake. It's just the sake of experience. It's all coming for the sake of experience. I think it also has to do. It's intertwined with karma and making choices. And this one will go and get experience. However, this is a causality. I think karma is a causality of things. And I also think karma is something that we come to experience and learn, and it will keep happening until we face it, let it be, and transmute it and kind of learn the lesson. So I think people have the same karma life after life. I don't think there's a way to get around it. I think it's imprinted in their spirit or in their soul in that way. I think there's a beauty. So the Kali Yugas, and as we move into the Yugas, I think the Earth is already perhaps ascended in that way, and the people are just catching up to it. A bunch of individuals,
I like that.
Yeah, there's accessibility to it now. Even with this Lila Quantum, they're able. It's just a network of healers able to measure. In the past 15 years, I'd say there's been huge surge in the level of consciousness available and the consciousness of the Earth. And to me, it's fascinating. I think there is ascending. I can say, at least in how I interpret it, is higher levels of consciousness. And I think it comes to me now. The more I allow the lower levels of consciousness, perhaps imprinted in my DNA and perhaps in my ancestry to be, because I was just deflecting more of the sadness and the lower levels of consciousness. I was only able to be in a smaller container, but it's kind of like a rubber band. The more I let the lower be and express them, the higher I can go. That's at least has been my experience. And yeah, I definitely think after I had my experience with ayahuasca and I came kind of a full cycle from atheist to agnostic, I'm like, you know what, I don't know what I don't know, to then experiencing ayahuasca was like I could feel and know consciousness or God, however people want to call it, like this higher power within me. I didn't feel like it's only me. I felt like it's all around me. It's the computer that I'm currently used to see you. It's all part of creation. I don't think there's really any randomness to it. I think it's just the way things are evolving and people, as you're saying, make a yes or no about choices and listen to a thought and whatnot. And from that point on, it just keeps going, expanding. I do think there's also all kinds of other forces, let's say, that have to do with the Earth. By now, other planets. I mean, I was never into astrology. I got those readings called Human Design, which is based on where planets are. And people that did not know me at all tell me pretty much my life story, my life's mission, like
Yeah.
zero knowledge of me. And I'm like, all right, so we got something here with these other planets. Are there also the planets? They seem to be from NASA. I don't think so. Then people will say that they do see them. They have seen them with some telescopes. Other ones are able to put telescopes with cameras and show that it looks like cymatics. Like, and I let people go and research that. That's a whole rabbit hole right there. I don't know. I'll tell you that I don't know. But it's been fascinating to see what's possible and what the experiences that people have. There's definitely ascension. I've been hearing stories not only with just my experience and my family, but just stories of all kinds of people that were poo-pooing a lot of that woo-woo world and are coming into it, especially in the past few years.
Well, we are a product of what's greater than us, are we not?
Absolutely.
So the cosmos, I mean, we are products of the cosmos, whether we like it or not.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Do you see me with this like grainy thing right now around me, or is it just
Yeah, I
me?
do. Is that a filter or is that just a
I never
lag or
see.
something?
I've never seen it before. It says actual recording is higher quality, but I don't know if I'm beaming with this energy that I see around me. There are no filters in here. It's a pretty simple platform, and I try to keep it as
That's probably
clean.
to save bandwidth as it's uploading
Yeah,
and recording.
yeah,
That's my
it's all good.
guess.
Actually, there's something that actually shows in the way that it shows, and I don't think it's going to show to the audience because it's recording locally, but it's something called the Tiglis. And the Tiglis, I don't know if have you heard of that?
No.
So have you had the experience sometimes when you look like sometimes towards the sky, or like you look from an airplane, or just like somewhere like towards the ocean, you see this like little tiny like sparkly things moving like very quickly. I used to call it like life force energy, just like you kind of see some extent of like the matrix, this energy that connects between all of us. It's called Tiglis. I learned it from one of my teachers who was in her mid 80s. And I see them actually a lot more in Florida. I think there's something to do with light, the way that it hits. It reminds me of that. So yeah, I figured I'll share that. I'm curious. It seems like you've really had, as you're saying, like a gradual process of coming to, I like to call it a knowing of how things work, and then a deeper and deeper knowing. Was this really just by reading and meeting, your ex-girlfriend and such, or was there like some sort of plants involved, teachers that helped you think, propel you into this place?
That's a good question. It's all been so slow and gradual that I'm not sure if there was a teacher in particular that really helped me. I mean, I mentioned Mark Passio. There's a lot of people on the internet who I listen to, and I kind of devour everything they put out. So Mark Passio is one of them. Dr. Longo now is one of them. He's teaching me so much about history and the old world and the new world and America and the Gulf Coast. That's kind of putting a lot of pieces together for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure if I racked my brain, I could think of other podcasts that I've just consumed so much of. Have you heard of Jay Dyer? He's very current. He's a YouTuber and he's a writer. I really like his material, except for he has no patience for vegans and he kind of talks shit on vegans, which I don't appreciate. I mean, because he teaches, so his specialties are theology, So he's an Orthodox Christian. His specialties also are debate. So he's a master philosopher and debater and has this logical brain that is so on point. He studies espionage and conspiracy, and he also studies Hollywood and pop culture. So he fuses all these things together. And I've learned a lot about theology from him and about his reasoning for the transcendence of God. And he really backs it up with a philosophical way, which surprises me why he uses so many ad hominem attacks against vegans, calling us dumb and weak and things like that, because that is a logical fallacy. He always points out logical fallacies that don't hold up in debate, and name calling is one of them, which he resorts to pretty much primarily to, in his words, debunk veganism, which I'd really like to have a conversation with him. Let's just put it that way. So anyways, everything else he talks about as far as spirituality and God, I've been learning from him. Some other, right now I can't really put my finger on anything, but every friend I've had has influenced me in some way. Every book I've read, every podcast I've listened to, even getting into astrology and human design, like you said, it kind of is teaching me that maybe there is some sort of grand design that we are just expressions of, because it certainly seems that way.
Did you have your reading?
Yes, I've had a human design session, and it's super accurate as far as I can tell.
Can you share some of what you learned about yourself?
Sure. I'm a generator with sacral authority. I'm a 6'2", which I'm starting to learn more about, is the role model hermit. And that's highly accurate in my life as far as wanting that 2 energy of being a hermit. The second line, I think, is the window where you look out across the world. So I do have that hermit energy, but I also have the 6th line, which is role model. And I've been doing that a lot as far as exemplifying change in the world that I just naturally gravitate to, but people look at and say, let me try that, or something like that. So yeah, there's so much more. I have a closed head in ajna, meaning I have the 2 heads, the 2 centers that are in the head. I forget what they're called. One's ajna, one's something else. I have those filled in, and they're connected through a channel, but they're not connected to the rest of my body. So I have a very powerful wheel going on in my head of just thoughts and logic and everything all the time. It pretty much never stops. And I also learned that I can hook up to others like you and have amazing conversations and really utilize my throat center, my throat chakra, because I have an open throat center. So when I'm by myself, I have a very hard time expressing authentically. But when I get with other people and they ask questions and we can bounce off each other, it seems like I have a much greater ability to open up that throat chakra and utilize it. So those are a few things about my human design that I find really interesting.
That's cool. Yeah, I have a sacral authority. I'm actually a 4-2, so I have the hermit in me in terms of learning things and just sitting down and sometimes just going into my nook there. It's interesting what you said about the throat chakra, because it seems like, as you're saying, once there's a mirror to you from another, say, separate being, I'm just going to put the quotations mark there on separate, it's kind of, the ping pong is flowing a little bit more, which is it's super, super interesting. I'm fascinated by human design. I think there's a lot of potential for a lot of people when they will dive into their human design. I will share a link actually to the woman that I got my last session with. It was phenomenal, and I learned a ton. It was a huge synchronicity meeting her. Her name is Amanda Barnett at Barney Flow. So I'll share a link there. I was asking also, like, did you have any like plant medicine experiences or journeys that you feel like were influential?
Yes. I got a little bit into hallucinogens in my 20s, and I did mushrooms a handful of times, and I did LSD a handful of times. I don't know if you can consider LSD a plant medicine. It might be synthetic. I don't know where it came from, but
Synthetic.
there was one. Yeah. So I guess this does not fall under the category of plant medicine, but it is a medicine, and it did. This one particular LSD trip really opened my eyes to the interconnectivity of everything.
Mm.
I was at a music festival, and I could see the interconnectivity of everything on every level. It was amazing. So on the smallest scale, I could see all my blood vessels working together in my hands and in my body. I could see the brain communicating with my toes to not trip while I was dancing, and then zooming out, I could see the interconnectivity of me and the person I was dancing with. I could literally see the strings and the rubber bands being pushed and pulled as we danced together. I could literally see the waves of energy coming off the stage from the band. I could see
Nice.
how we were all connected to the band. And honestly, my mind zoomed all the way out, and I could see the interconnectivity of that little town we were in connected to the other towns around it, connected to the greater world. And I looked up at the sky and I saw a sliver of the moon, and I saw the interconnectivity of that. And when I say saw, I don't necessarily just mean understood. I mean, I saw it visually. There was lines, there was almost this Donnie Darko-esque portal and strings like connecting everybody and everything. And after that day, I had a very much more spiritual approach, I think, to the world, because I saw how much we were all connected and how much we really are one organism, if you think about it that way.
No, that's so cool. How old were you when you had this experience?
I think I was around 26. Yeah, because that was the first time I did LSD. Because I had a lot of friends who did it when I was in high school and early college, and I never was interested. I was actually a little scared of it. And then I read two books. I read Acid Dreams. Forget the author, but that was the one that talks about the CIA involvement with LSD experimentation. And then I read the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test by that journalist. What was his name? Anyways, it followed Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters around San Francisco and on the road trip, and about their experiences using LSD. And after reading those two books, I said, I'm not scared to try this. I want to try this. I want to see where it takes me. So yeah, I was 26 years old.
That's pretty cool. I'm curious, did you have any other experiences since the 26 that you would say were influential or profound?
Not necessarily. I think that film Earthlings that I mentioned
Mm-hmm.
really expanded my mind and my heart, and really shook me up and allowed me to be reborn, so to speak, into a new consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
After finishing that film, which it took me 3 days to get through because it's so emotionally taxing and so sad.
Oh.
After viewing it, I felt like I had to make these changes, and I felt reborn into this new consciousness. So sometimes it's not a medicine, but it's a film that might do that, or it might be a conversation with a friend. These are all tools that can unlock certain things in our
Yeah.
consciousness. And I'd say Earthlings was hugely transformative for me.
How many years ago was that?
That was only about 2.5 or 3 years ago, because shortly after I said I have to go vegan, I have no other choice.
Mm-hmm.
And it just gave me the confidence and the love to do it. I guess I needed to not be afraid of it, and I needed to love what I was about to jump into. And that film really helped me embody that, I think.
It's beautiful. How did you find the farm that you're currently living on?
Okay, so after the perceived pandemic, which people call COVID, I
Okay.
realized I really wanted to connect with some like-minded people. So I bought tickets to a few events. First, it was this Health Freedom for Humanity symposium. Then I went to this Red Pill Expo. And then I went to the Woodstock Fruit Festival last summer in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I met the owner of the farm. He said he needed help, planting trees and using farm equipment. And it just planted in my mind, like, maybe I could see myself there for sure. I was toying between Ecuador and Costa Rica and other tropical places, but South Florida just seemed closer to home, a little more accessible, and still a tropical place that I could be self-sustainable on. So I came down here in February, stayed the whole month just to kind of try it out and see how I liked it, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, that's how I found the farm. Is I met the owner at the Woodstock Fruit Festival.
Did you have experience in farming prior?
A little bit. I volunteered on a farm in my 20s, and I've always had a community garden. Maybe not always, for 5 or 6 years. I had a community garden, so I had gardening experience. But as far as like heavy machinery, I never had any experience. But the work manager here is so great that he's teaching us all how to use the Bobcat, repair it, use all the machines on this farm, and I feel very confident now in skills I had no idea I even had or was interested in. So I had some growing experience, you might put it that way.
It's cool. How long do you see yourself staying on the farm, or any vision there, or just you kind of just going with the flow at the moment, no plans?
Yeah, I'm kind of just going with the flow. I don't want to make too many long-term plans. I kind of have to take things month by month. That's just my style. Have noticed in my life every 3 years I tend to transition to something else. So, maybe I'll be here for a couple more years and then decide I want my own land. I think it would be really nice to have my own house and land with a community that we can cultivate together and build the type of community we want to see. But that's also happening here on this farm. So I could be here, the rest of my life. Who knows? I really, really enjoy it. The community is beautiful. We're achieving some great things. We're growing lots and lots of trees and lots of fruit. So it's going to be sustainable one day for all of us. And, who knows? We just got to take it month by month.
That's awesome. When you said close to home, where is originally home, or where's family?
I grew up in Massachusetts, outside Boston. And then I went to college in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is right near New Hampshire. And so I lived there for 10 years. Lowell is close to my heart. I have a lot of friends and memories there. But now my folks, they moved to Western Mass, Central Western, so near Springfield. And so I go and see them, maybe once or twice a year. But yeah, the Northeast was always home for me. And now the South feels more like home because I just love this climate. I love the weather, and I love the pace of life here in the South too. I lived in New Orleans for 6 years, and New Orleans has this magic to it, this special homey feeling because everybody's so nice and open and warm. And whereas I think New York has maybe the worst reputation for having like these people that are just cold and closed off, and if you say hi to someone in the street, they think you're going to rob them. Whereas in New Orleans, you have to say hi to people in the street. Otherwise, they think you're crazy. So, I really just appreciate the warmth and the culture of New Orleans. And right now, South Florida is giving me a very similar vibe of just being very hospitable as far as the climate and the land goes. People have this idea that South Florida is just nothing but mosquitoes and rednecks and oppressive heat. But yes, we have a lot of mosquitoes, but the weather here is actually very moderate. It doesn't get lower than, a certain temperature, and it doesn't really get higher than a certain temperature. It never gets higher than 100 degrees in Miami, ever. Like, you can look this up. Record temperatures, Miami. And I think it'll tell you that the highest temperature ever recorded is 98 degrees, which is strange because Massachusetts regularly gets above 100 degrees every year. And it gets well below zero too. So there's this huge swing of temperatures in places like Massachusetts or other temperate regions. But in South Florida, the window is very, very much smaller. So yes, it can be hot. It can be in the 80s. It can be in the 90s, but it doesn't really get that oppressive to me. I personally just love South Florida. So this is my home now.
It's beautiful. When I moved to South Florida, I felt right at home. I moved from Tel Aviv, Israel, which is a warm place. It's not as humid as Miami, but it's similar. So I was just in a bathing suit pretty much all day. And as you said, like, it didn't get that hot. I think it's the humidity and closeness to the equator there. So it's actually a very comfortable place. In the shade, in the water, lots of great areas in the water there, the bay and the Gulf and the ocean, as long as you stay away from sharks. So yeah, it's a fantastic place. I'm happy to hear that's how you feel there, and I definitely resonate with that. So Florida is a warm place in my heart. I got married in South Florida, so I went there to first college, and my wife is from there, and I got married there. It's a fantastic, beautiful place, and it's luscious. It's actually very lively. A lot of places there are super, super lively. It's beyond Miami. I'm just thinking about like even Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, St. Pete, and it's a pretty conscious place. I think there's some great energy vortexes happening in Florida. It's just a very special state. In the news, it may seem very dumb. Let's say to dumb it down. And there's a lot of activity perhaps happening sometimes, especially at night in a warm place. People are just out and about, especially with alcohol induced and other drugs. They are going to do things that are not very beneficial for humans, but there's also a ton of beauty in there.
Yeah, I mean, any place is going to have what you bring to it. We shouldn't let the mainstream news dictate how we feel about certain places, right? So I have a lot of friends who even say, yo, I would never go to Florida for this, this, and this reason. And all those reasons were planted in their mind from the media. They've never been here themselves, or never have with an open mind and experienced it for themselves, because I try to remind them, if you bring this energy of whatever you want to see, that's what you'll see. So except for snow, we don't have that. Can't bring snow energy here. but yeah, it is very conscious. And it's funny that when I stayed here in February, a friend of mine kind of jokingly asked me, like, dude, how are the babes in Miami? Asking about the women. And I said, well, the women are very conscious here. The women I'm meeting here have a lot to say, and we just have beautiful conversations. So yeah, I've been meeting some great people here as well.
And I mean, I don't think it's going to be the audience of this podcast, but if somebody's looking for the babes, they can find them. And they're just in different pockets, different areas geographically within a state can hold different consciousness. So I lived in South Beach, Miami Beach, and definitely for the ones that are looking for the babes and the women in that way, you can find them there. But there's just so many conscious, uplifted, and powerful women and powerful beings in general. But I'm speaking of women, a lot of them in Florida. I like what you said about the energy, bringing it into a place or into something, and what you said earlier about, I forget, it was the guy who's poo-pooing veganism, but you still go and have gratitude, and you don't cancel that person because perhaps he's hurting one of your choices. You're like, I'll still take what he has to say about A, B, and C, and I think that's a huge skill to be able to see, like, nobody's perfect. We're going to disagree on things. And sometimes, even when somebody's even talking about some sort of fallacy and like they even teaching about something, but they themselves have the wound or whatever program that is running them and making them do things that are not very conscious and beautiful, but still to be able to take what nectar they have for us. I think everybody has something to teach us in the world. And it's a skill in order to not shut down, cancel somebody who say like, oh, because they poo-pooed veganism, like I'm not going to listen to everything that they say, or like I'm turned off. Like, oh, I'll still take it and kind of, whatever they say about something that you don't agree with, just let it be and accept that wherever they are, that's wherever they are. So I do encourage the audience, whoever's listening to it, to apply this approach.
Absolutely. Yeah, and props to you too for inviting me on. Even if I've been bringing up things that may be challenging to you, I think that's great that you just want to have this open conversation and learn more. We definitely need to strive to find commonalities amongst people. Otherwise, we'll just all be in camps of our own, and there'll be no unity. So, yeah, I fully agree.
And I think, as you said about everything being connected, being able to see that everything is connected, rather than like narrowing those bridges, actually increasing those bridges into bigger highways between us and learning from one another, exchanging the information, exchanging our views with an open mind, open heart, humility, vulnerability, to the point that we can actually learn together about like what perhaps is the best approach. And sometimes it's going to be the best approach. As I was talking about some performers, they decided after being vegan for a long time, they want to eat some meat. Perhaps they want to pack a bit more muscle to be in a Cirque du Soleil. Like, go ahead. Does that mean perhaps that they're going to live until 100 with no arthritis? Maybe not, but like that's what they choose for this incarnation. So I think just respecting that there's no one answer and having all the information and how it's presented and being open to it, rather than poo-pooing and saying like, oh, I was a vegan for 5 years and I was skinny fat, and I've heard all of those things. It's like, yeah, I mean, share all this information, share whatever works for you. I don't think there's one approach, but I think there are some commonalities. Instead about the natural law, some things are just like, this is the construct. Like if you're gonna look, and I looked at this chart, like this is what our teeth look like, and this is what the other animals look like, and we're gonna, you touched on with the old Florida World stream about blood types and all that. There's all kinds of myths, perhaps, about what is going on and information that we've been fed about what is good for us. I think it's healthy to have one skepticism, doubt, but also openness. Yeah, I mean the openness part about it, and the realization that we constantly can be wrong. I'll always say, like, I make probably a million mistakes per day in a way, just based on like not understanding how things work. The things that I don't know will always be way greater than the things that I know, or things that I know that I don't know. So I will leave it at that. I love
Hmm.
your Instagram page, especially the certified orgasmic. I think there's something pretty orgasmic about it. And look, a bunch of fruit when you cut them open. I don't know if it's for women or also, but like you cut them open and it's pretty exciting. It's pretty damn exciting. So the pictures, yeah, and then I think there's just like the saliva that is happening when I'm walking around fruits. When a fruit is being cut. When I think about I have a juicer, like I'm just thinking about fresh fruit. There's something about it. So I encourage everybody to check out your Instagram page. I'd love for you to give all your links and where people can find you and also be inspired by your path.
Sure. Check out the Instagram page, Certified Orgasmic, with an underscore in between those. I am going to change that name soon because I have a more fitting name for it, and it's going to be a brand that does not have the sexual innuendo. So I think I am actually turning away some of my potential audience with a with the sexual euphemism like that. So I'm going to change the name. So if you're looking for this in a few months when this podcast is out, it might not be called Certified Orgasmic anymore, but you can search the hashtag and find what I do end up calling it. I don't want to say the name now because it's not fully ready to unveil yet. But as of now, yeah, check out Instagram, Certified Orgasmic. Like you said, it's just all fruit. It's all the fruit that I eat. Not all that I eat, but most. If it looks good and I remember to take a picture, I'll take a picture and upload it. Fruit does speak for itself. The beauty of fruit speaks for itself. It is the sexual reproductive part of the plant. So in that sense, it's inherently sexy. It is actually inviting naturally. It wants you to be attracted to it. The vibrant colors, the sweetness, the smell. It wants bees to be attracted to it, to pollinate the flowers. I guess that's not the fruit itself, but it really wants humans and animals to be attracted to these fruits so that we can disperse the seed for the tree. There's a symbiotic relationship going on between fruit trees and all animals in that ecosystem. So, I do agree and fully believe that fruit is just inherently sexy. And that I do love this page because I get to show off the beauty and the vibrance of these plant-based foods. When you compare that to an Instagram page of someone who posts all their keto meals, for example, or their cooked vegan meals, even there's a lot of brown going on, a lot of white and brown and oily things going on that just aren't that appealing to me inherently. But then you see they'll sprinkle parsley on it and it kind of makes it pop. There's a little bit of that green, right? Or they'll put some orange slices next to it and that makes it pop with some orange. Well, I contend that it's those plant-based foods, the parsley and the oranges, that is all we need to be eating. We don't need to be eating the things that don't inherently look beautiful. So, yeah, check out that page. And then I also have another Instagram called Radical Health Zine, Zine, which is short for magazine. Zines were old pamphlets that punks used to make in the 80s and 90s and, hand out for free at punk shows, things like that. So coming up, going to punk shows, and these anarchist punk bands would always have these zines, and I was always inspired. I'd pick up a few and read them and learn about decarceration and things like that. So I decided to make my own zines that are plant-based, teaching about health, teaching about holistic approaches to health, because it was all a response to the perceived pandemic of COVID over the past few years. Everyone seemed to be freaking out about health, yet no one was talking about getting enough sleep, reducing stress, what kind of food we eat, right? No one's talking about this stuff. They're only talking about take this medical intervention and that medical intervention. And so clearly I had to respond with what I feel is the holistic approach, what you put in your mouth, the kind of ideas and thoughts and people you surround yourself with in a holistic sense. So Radical Health Zine, Certified Orgasmic. You can find all my work on my website, sethbailin.com. That's Seth, Bailin. I have a lot of writings up there. You can order paper copies of my zine, or you can download digital copies. I also have lots of albums of music and video and posters that I've made and things you can check out. I have a lot of interests. So yeah, that's my website. Those are my social medias. Please get in touch. I'd love to hear from anyone who listened to the show and got anything out of it.
Love it, Seth. Love it. I'm going to continue checking out your work and the articles and music. Fascinated by your path. The one thing I want to mention when the pandemic and whatnot with health is the one nutrient I think that a lot of people are missing is the sun. I'm a big fan of the sun. And I think we've been deterred by the sun and sunscreen and all that. And the biggest problem is that a lot of people are indoors. I'm indoors currently, having a conversation from an air-conditioned place. But in general, getting full spectrum of sun from sunrise to sunset is ideal. In the modern world, perhaps we work on computers and sit in smoothie shops and whatnot. It's not going to happen. But work your skin like you would work a muscle or anything else that you would develop over time. And you will see a lot of benefits from getting sun. So sun has great amounts of vitamin D and way beyond it. So very healing, and there's a great spiritual connection and information coming from the sun. So I'll add that piece before we part ways.
I fully agree. And I think if you want to wear sunscreen, just make it sleeves. Just make it a long shirt and a hat. That is sunscreen. Okay, shade is sunscreen. You don't want to lather these petrochemicals on your body, benzene and things like this. It's poison. If you read the ingredients on most sunscreens and look them up, you will find they are toxic. They're poisonous. Do not put those on your skin. I don't want to give advice. Let me just say, I don't put those on my skin. If I want sunscreen, I'll wear long sleeves, but I'm out in the sun all day. And you're totally right about that. We got to get in touch with what many people call source, the sun.
Absolutely. And there are, for the people like, but I still want to be in a regatta around Miami without a shirt, like perhaps look for a mineral-based sunscreen. Sometimes you will see, for the ones health conscious, you may see some sunflower oil in there. Not the best thing for you, but, just like a cheat meal in some ways. Perhaps sometimes you want to make that conscious choice. But I think overall, the 80-20 or the 80-10-10, let's say, rule is that choose the times you're going to be exposed to the sun, work your skin like you would work in the gym. And for the ones that want to go the step further, they live in a colder place, so don't get as much sunlight during the year. I highly recommend the vitamin D sun lamp from, I actually have it right here. I'm going to take a look at that. So there's a company that makes it. There's a lot of research around it. I'll throw the link in the show notes, but it's like 3 minutes per day, every other day, and you'll get tons of vitamin D, which resolves a ton of perhaps symptoms that are happening in the body and gives a lot of great energy and health. So I'll kind of close that chapter there in the sun. Seth, thank you so much. What a great opportunity and joy to meet you here on the microphone. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Yoni. It's a pleasure.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Take care. Until the next one. See ya. Well, lovely beings, I hope you enjoyed and were inspired by this conversation as much as I was. You can find the full show notes and all episodes on my website at yonihavana.com/podcast. If you are a man and you are called to do transformational work to become a better man, to find and grow the divinity within you, and you are longing a community of masculine men who share a passion for growth, please check out Men of Integrity by going to moi.community. Lastly, if you are enjoying the Yoni Havana podcast, I'd be so grateful if you take a moment to leave us a rating and a review on your podcast app of choice. The Yoni Havana podcast is a brand new show, and your support would help reach new people by rating higher on the algorithms. Also, your feedback would help me deliver the best experience to you as the show keeps evolving. Much love and a big aho. See you on the next one.